Deep beneath the sun-drenched ruins of the Mediterranean lies a nightmare forged in bronze, a weapon so devastating you know that the Caesars themselves ordered it buried and its creators executed. High in the sun-scorched hills of the Levant, where the wind whispers secrets of forgotten empires, a team of modern archaeologists brushes away 2,000 years of silence. They expect the usual treasures of the Roman frontier, gold coins, marble busts, or perhaps a fragment of a lost epic. Instead, they find a casket sealed not with wax, but with thick, heavy lead. When the seal finally yields, the air seems to grow heavy with the weight of a long-forgotten crime. Inside, there is no glint of silver or the soft glow of jewelry. Instead, there are the jagged, rusted remains of a machine that should not exist. It is a masterpiece of clockwork and cruelty, a fusion of Hellenistic science and Roman ambition that was never meant to see the light of day. Rome did not conquer the known world through luck alone, right? They were the undisputed masters of the siege, the sword, and the shield. But here, in this shadowed vault, we find evidence of a flirtation with something far darker. This was a mechanical apocalypse so terrifying that it chilled the blood of even the most ruthless emperors. Historians have long praised the discipline of the Roman legions, but this discovery forces us to look closer at the shadows behind the throne. I mean, these were weapons deemed too efficient at their grim task, monstrosities of engineering that threatened to consume the very empire they were built to protect. The Caesars realized that some power is too great for any man to wield, even a god emperor. To maintain their grip on the world, they chose to bury their own progress. Today, we break the silence of the vaults to reveal the horrors that Rome tried to erase from the pages of time. The history books tell a polished tale of Rome. You know, the one we all learned in school? We are taught that the empire rose on the disciplined march of the legionary and the unwavering cold edge of the gladius. It is a story of iron, grit, and marble, a curated image of a civilization that won its glory through superior tactics and sheer human will. But if we peel back the layers of dust and time, we find that this image was a carefully maintained facade. The Iron Myth was the official version of history the Caesars wanted the world to see. Beneath the surface, however, hidden within the scorched and carbonized fragments of the Herculaneum papyri, a much darker reality begins to emerge. When the ash of Vesuvius settled, it didn't just bury a city, it preserved secrets that were never meant to survive the reign of the Flavians. Among the thousands of scrolls, scholars have recently struggled to decode mentions of a group that existed entirely off the imperial record, the Architecti Infernalis, the Infernal Architects. These weren't your standard military engineers building bridges and aqueducts. I mean, these were a shadowy collective of thinkers and tinkerers, funded by the deepest, darkest vaults of the treasury. Their task was to push the boundaries of the natural world, to create machines of war that bordered on the supernatural.
Why would an empire at the height of its power go to such lengths to keep these men in the shadows? The answer, right, lies in the volatility of their work. While the gladius was predictable and reliable, the creations of the Architecti Infernalis were anything but. They were weapons that didn't just target the enemy, they threatened to consume the very soldiers who wielded them. The scrolls hint at projects that could turn the tide of a siege in minutes, yet the Roman leadership feared the psychological cost. They wanted a world that feared the Roman soldier, not a world that feared Roman sorcery or unstable alchemy. Rome was desperate to appear conventional, to maintain the illusion that their dominance was a result of divine favor and Roman virtue. To admit they relied on infernal technology would be to admit a weakness, a reliance on forces they could barely control. And so, the blueprints were burned, the engineers were silenced, and the most terrifying experiments were dismantled and buried in unmarked vaults. But as we sift through the soot of the past, we find that one of these buried secrets was far more than a mere concept. It was a weapon designed to harness the very breath of the gods, and its first field test would lead to a disaster so absolute, the emperor himself ordered every trace of it to be erased from the face of the earth. Behind the thick smoke of the burning scrolls stood the Architecti Infernalis, the hellish architects. You see, these were not the men who built the celebrated aqueducts or the sturdy roads that led to the heart of the capital. No, they were a shadowy elite within the Roman military, engineers who believed that steel and discipline had reached their absolute limit. To hold an empire that spanned the known world, they realized they needed something more than soldiers. They needed overwhelming psychological terror. They called their secret pursuit Deus Invisum, technology hated by the gods. These men were obsessed with the idea that the natural laws of the world were merely suggestions to be broken. Among the charred remains of their records, you see, historians have pieced together the blueprints for one of their most disturbing creations, the bronze claw. This was not a simple defensive engine, mind you. It was a masterpiece of mechanical predatory instinct. Designed to be hidden beneath the tide, the claw would remain invisible until an enemy ship crossed its path. Then, with the groan of massive bronze gears, a colossal metallic arm would erupt from the depths. It didn't just smash the hull or set the sails ablaze. It reached out, gripped the ship, and plucked it from the sea like a hawk snatching a fish. Witnesses describe the sight of a 60-oar galley dangling in the air, its crew falling like ants into the churning water before the machine dashed the vessel against the jagged rocks. On paper, the bronze claw was a triumph, a weapon that could make the Roman coastline an impenetrable fortress of steel and salt. Indeed, it was the ultimate deterrent. And yet, within a single generation, the blueprints were buried, the workshops were razed, and the very name of the Architecti Infernalis was scrubbed from the imperial ledgers.
If these machines were the pinnacle of Roman ingenuity, why were they suddenly branded as a divine curse? Why did the generals who commissioned them choose to face their enemies with simple iron swords, rather than the godlike power of the claw? The answer lies not in the failure of the gears, but in a horrific incident that occurred during a moonlit trial in the Bay of Naples, a disaster that proved some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. While the Bay of Naples disaster whispered of mechanical horrors, an even older, more celestial terror was being forged in the secret workshops of the Roman military elite. For centuries, the siege of Syracuse was remembered for one name, Archimedes. History tells us of his legendary mirrors, giant arrays of polished bronze that allegedly called down the sun to incinerate the Roman fleet. But you know, the true story did not end with the fall of the city. It began when the Roman generals stepped over Archimedes' corpse and realized they had inherited the blueprints for the power of a god. This was not just a legend, right? Roman Black Ops divisions, known for their ruthless pragmatism, sought to refine what they called the specula ardens, the burning mirrors. They did not want a mere defensive tool. They wanted a portable, solar-powered wrath. Engineers experimented with hexagonal arrays of highly reflective silver-plated bronze mounted on articulated wooden scaffolds. By coordinating hundreds of soldiers to tilt their mirrors in unison, they could focus a concentrated beam of solar energy onto a single point from hundreds of yards away. The results were terrifyingly effective, yet fundamentally broken. During trials along the coast of Ostia, the weapon performed with a cruelty that unsettled even the most hardened centurions. When the beam hit a target ship, there was no slow burn. The wood did not just catch fire, it seemed to explode from the inside out as the moisture within the timber reached a flashpoint in seconds. The sea itself appeared to boil, and the air shimmered with a heat so intense it distorted the very horizon. But the weapon possessed a fatal flaw that no engineer could solve. It was a weapon of absolute chaos. The slightest shift in the wind, a passing cloud, or a momentary lapse in the soldier's coordination turned the lethal beam into an erratic scythe. More often than not, the blinding glare reflected back into the eyes of the operators, permanently searing their retinas and leaving entire divisions sightless.
In one documented incident, a sudden gust of wind tilted the primary array, sweeping the beam across the Roman docks instead of the target, liquefying the pitch on the pier and trapping dozens of sailors in a liquid furnace. The Senate looked upon these reports not with pride, but with a growing sense of dread. They realized that the burning mirror was a weapon that demanded a level of precision the world was not yet ready to provide. It was the first instance of uncontrollable warfare, a power that ignored the discipline of the phalanx and the courage of the individual soldier. They feared that if such a weapon were ever turned against Rome herself, there would be no defense. So the specula ardens were dismantled. The silver was melted down, and the blueprints were supposedly burned. But as the empire expanded and the thirst for absolute power grew, some within the shadows of the Palatine Hill began to wonder, could the fire of the sun be replaced by something even more volatile, something that did not require the sky to be clear to kill? Because while Rome had tried to bury the sun's wrath, they were about to discover a subterranean fire that was far more difficult to extinguish.
While the sun's fire was a cosmic terror, the Roman military-industrial complex, they sought a more mechanical brand of slaughter. They looked to the designs of Dionysius of Alexandria, who had once dared to dream of a weapon that never needed to rest. Enter the Polybolos, the world's first repeating ballista. On paper, it was a miracle of engineering, a chain-driven beast capable of firing bolt after bolt without a single pause for reloading. It promised to turn a lone operator into a hurricane of iron and wood, a one-man army capable of holding a breach against 1,000 men. In a secluded valley far from the prying eyes of the Senate, a secret cohort was assembled for a demonstration that was meant to change the face of war forever. The emperor himself sat beneath a crimson canopy, waiting to witness the future of Roman dominance. The architecti, the elite engineers of the legions, had pushed the limits of ancient metallurgy. They had replaced traditional rope with high-tension bronze chains and reinforced the torsion springs until they hummed with a violent, vibrating energy. The air was thick with the scent of machine oil and the nervous sweat of the men who stood just a little too close to the machine. The order was given. The crank turned. For a few fleeting seconds, the Polybolos was a god. It spat a stream of bolts so fast they blurred into a single line of death, shattering the heavy oak practice targets into clouds of toothpicks. The speed was unnatural. It was a mechanical heartbeat, thumping with the rhythm of a new industrialized era. But the Roman engineers had forgotten one thing. Bronze has a breaking point, and the gods of physics, you see, do not take kindly to being pushed. A high-pitched metallic shriek suddenly echoed off the valley walls. The rhythm of the firing stumbled. The tension in the torsion bundles had reached a critical, unstable peak. Then, the machine suffered what modern ballisticians call a catastrophic cook-off. The main drive chain, stressed beyond its physical limits, snapped with the force of a lightning bolt. The stored energy in the bronze springs didn't just release, it exploded. The Polybolos disintegrated into a storm of jagged metal and splintered wood. The crew operating the machine was erased in an instant, shredded by the very weapon they sought to master. But the carnage radiated outward. The recoil sent the remaining magazine of bolts flying wildly into the surrounding cohort, turning a disciplined line of Rome's finest into a scene of chaotic, bloody butchery. The silence that followed was heavier than the roar of the explosion. The emperor did not applaud. He looked upon the twisted wreckage and the blood-soaked grass and saw an omen. To the Roman mind, this was Deus Invisum, an affront to the natural order. This was technology that had stepped outside the boundaries of human reach, a machine that had developed a hunger for its own masters. The designs were suppressed, and the architecti were forbidden from ever whispering the name Polybolos again. They chose to bury the machine to save the empire's soul. However, as the broken bronze was cast into unmarked pits, a new report arrived from the frontiers. It seemed the Romans weren't the only ones experimenting with the forbidden. Deep in the deserts of the East, a different kind of horror was being unearthed, one that didn't rely on gears or chains, but on a liquid that could burn, even on the surface of the sea.
The smoke over the testing grounds had not even cleared before the mood within the Palatine Hill shifted from awe to a cold, calculating terror. You see, the emperor did not see the Polybolos as a triumph of Roman ingenuity. He saw it as a dagger aimed directly at the heart of the throne. If such a weapon could be mass-produced, if its blueprints fell into the hands of a rebellious governor or a rising usurper, well, the traditional Roman legions, the very foundation of imperial power, would become obsolete overnight. In a single echoing stroke of the pen, the emperor signed the edict of absolute erasure. This was not merely a cancellation of a project, it was a war against the future. The order was total. Every machine was to be dismantled, every gear melted down, and every scrap of parchment containing the mathematical secrets of the repeating bolt was to be consigned to the flames. Then came the purge of the minds that created them. The architecti infernalis, the brilliant engineers once hailed as the masters of the new age, were suddenly branded as heretics of the state. These men, who had spent decades mastering the tension of horsehair and the precision of bronze gears, found themselves hunted through the narrow streets of Rome. Their workshops, once humming with the sound of progress, were razed to the ground, leaving nothing but charred stone and broken dreams. But the emperor was a pragmatist. He knew that knowledge is a ghost that is difficult to kill. To ensure these monsters never rose again, the most sensitive blueprints were not destroyed, but exiled. Legends tell of lead-lined caskets, heavy and cold, carried by silent guards to the most desolate corners of the empire, buried beneath the shifting sands of Egypt or hidden in the damp, nameless forests of Britannia. This was a deliberate act of technological regression. Rome chose the safety of the known over the lethality of the unknown, right? By burying the Polybolos and its kin, the empire effectively froze military technology in time. For the next 1,000 years, the battlefield would remain a place of shields, spears, and simple catapults, as the world's most advanced superpower intentionally turned its back on the mechanical revolution. Rome had saved itself from its own creations, choosing to survive by clinging to the past. The machines were gone, and the secrets were buried. Yet, as the last of the lead caskets was lowered into the earth, a terrifying realization began to dawn on the imperial scouts in the Far East. Rome had buried its mechanical nightmares, but in the sun-scorched deserts beyond the frontier, a different kind of horror was emerging, one that didn't rely on gears, but on a terrifying power that defied the very laws of nature. The dust of centuries has a way of softening the edges of terror, you know. As archaeologists brush away the grit of the Italian soil or the shifting sands of North Africa, these rusted relics emerge not as triumphs of engineering, but as warnings from a forgotten age. We realize now that the Roman Empire did not simply collapse under its own weight or fall solely to the blades of the Goths. It chose to survive by burying its own monsters.
The emperor's architects had touched something they simply could not control. They had glimpsed a future of rapid-fire machines and steam-driven power, a world that would have rendered the legionnaire's shield and the farmer's plow entirely obsolete. To the Roman elite, such progress was a direct existential threat to the divine order of the state. They understood a terrifying truth. A world governed by machines would eventually become a world that no longer needed an emperor. Think of the sheer weight of that decision. The repeating ballistae, the intricate gearworks that mirrored the clockwork of the heavens, and the early whispers of the steam engine, they were all cast into the dark. These were technologies so advanced that after Rome interred them in the earth, the world would not see their like again until the soot and smoke of the Industrial Revolution over 1,500 years later.
mankind was forced to start over, walking back into a simpler, darker age, simply because the masters of the Mediterranean were afraid of the shadows their own brilliance cast. It leaves us with a chilling question for our own era, right? As we stand on the precipice of our own technological breakthroughs, from artificial intelligence to weapons that can erase history in a heartbeat, one has to wonder, what are we burying today? What secrets are we hiding in our own digital vaults and lead caskets, hoping the future will never find them? Perhaps the Romans were right to fear the metal monsters they created. Perhaps some secrets were never meant to be unearthed. But as we look at the empty sockets of these ancient machines, we have to decide for ourselves if we are brave enough to learn from them. Should these ruins remain buried, or is it time we finally face the nightmares of our past? If you believe the truth is worth the risk, tell us in the comments what you think the world is hiding today. And if you want to join us as we continue to unearth the stories the world tried to forget, subscribe to Hidden Epoch Narratives. The past is never as dead as it seems.